Kept you waiting, huh? Welcome! You are currently watching part 2 of a 2-part series of videos analyzing Big Boss. We'll be going over the later years of his life up until the moment of his death. Therefore, I highly recommend you watch the first part of the video that covered his earlier years so that you're not lost during this video. With that being said, let's continue where we left off. The year is 1975. After the events of Peace Walker, Big Boss has expanded MSF into a formidable mercenary business, with military might on par with the developed nations of the world, especially after acquiring their own nuclear weapon. However, this prosperity would not last long. While Big Boss was on a solo rescue mission, MSF was ambushed by a covert strike force that infiltrated Mother Base, under the guise of a nuclear inspection from the IAEA. MSF was completely destroyed, and Big Boss was left critically injured after an explosion. The year is now 1984. 9 years have passed since the destruction of MSF, and Big Boss has remained in a coma during those years. Or so we thought. Now stay with me for this next bit. After seeing the destruction of MSF, Big Boss decides to rebuild, but not through the creation of Diamond Dogs, the new organization we see during the events of Phantom Pain. A military faction operating out in the seas isn't enough to ensure their survival. Therefore, he plans to build an actual military nation, and use a second Big Boss to keep his legend alive. Yes, the Big Boss from Phantom Pain, leader of the Diamond Dogs, is actually one of his soldiers, made to look and act like Big Boss through surgery and hypnotic suggestion. You see, both Big Boss and this soldier were injured within the same explosion during the destruction of MSF, and fell into comas. But the real Big Boss woke up earlier than him, and had agreed to have the injured soldier go through surgery during his coma that made him physically identical to Big Boss. This particular soldier is referred to as Venom Snake, and acted as Big Boss's phantom, carrying out operations to build up the legend of Big Boss and his army nation. Meanwhile, the real Big Boss made preparations for his new military nation outside of the public eye. What a twist, am I right? You make Shyamalan proud, Kojima. You cheeky fuck. I can't even begin to go over all the potential psychological consequences of this procedure on Venom Snake. But regardless, for this reason I will not be factoring in Venom Snake's individual actions in this analysis, because we're concerned with the original Big Boss. But the existence of Venom Snake altogether is a telling sign of Big Boss's descent into the war criminal we find in Metal Gear 2, Solid Snake. So rest assured, we will return to Venom Snake, who I believe is a better Big Boss than the original, but that's just my correct opinion. Just wanted to establish that now, because we're gonna speed right on through the rest of this history lesson to get to the good stuff. While Venom Snake was off fighting biological terrorism and literal Gundams, Big Boss infiltrated America by becoming the leader of the Foxhound unit, training a new generation of soldiers, while still providing support and resources to the creation of his military nation known as Outer Heaven. Fast forward to 1995, and we see that Outer Heaven eventually was destroyed by the unlikely efforts of a rookie soldier. This is now the second time Big Boss's vision for an army nation has been utterly ruined. After this defeat, Big Boss resorts to more desperate measures. The year is now 1999, relations between the Cold War superpowers have thawed, and regional conflicts are being resolved. After renouncing nukes forever, the threat of nuclear war is becoming a thing of the past. However, a military junta comes to power in Zanzibar Land and attacks nuclear disposal sites around the world, seizing the intact weapons and becoming the world's only nuclear power. Meanwhile, the world's oil supply has suddenly begun to dry up, leading to the development of Oilix, a valuable alternative energy source. The developer of Oilix is kidnapped by Zanzibar agents on his way to a public conference. With the world's only nuclear arsenal, as well as the newly developed energy source, this military junta firmly established its dominance over the rest of the world. And the leader is none other than the legendary Big Boss himself. At this point, we find Big Boss committing some of the most heinous crimes imaginable, the most damning being his manipulation of children. Big Boss admits to taking children who are victims of war for the purpose of turning them into soldiers. The world was literally progressing to an era of peace, and Big Boss decided to disrupt that peace by stealing all of the world's remaining nuclear weapons and holding the world's economy hostage. And what is his reasoning for this? Once you've awakened the warrior within, it never sleeps again. You crave ever bigger tensions, ever bigger thrills. What the f***ing fuck? You mean to tell me Big Boss brought the world into nuclear war because he missed the thrill of battle? I refuse to believe that is the actual reason. Big Boss's progression as a character to this point just made no sense and seemed like the most random turn. But then, I remembered something Big Boss said before. Big Boss sought to fight against the current establishment of warring nations by creating an army without borders who is willing to help any side that needs it. But what happens if the world has no need for their army? If the world has progressed to an era of peace, then what happens to the army that has maintained its survival by profiting off of conflicts around the world? If there's no conflict, then there's no need for an army. And Big Boss cannot let that happen. Otherwise, his army will literally perish. Therefore, Big Boss will act as the orchestrator of the world's conflict, ensuring that his soldiers will continue to have a place in the world. At this point, it's not about being a deterrent for the world anymore. It's an inability to move beyond the times, and a desperate ploy for survival. The times were phasing Big Boss's army nation out, and he could not have that. Now, I do believe that Big Boss wants to ensure the survival of his people, his soldiers who have rallied behind his cause because he gave them purpose and hope after their countries have abandoned them. Remember, he started this whole journey to ensure soldiers are not manipulated by the nations that they used to fight for. That was his entire purpose for the past 26 years. So I do believe it is entirely in his character for him to think that this twisted logic is for their own survival as a nation. A few soldiers die as they are sent into war, but the whole nation continues to thrive with the war economy. From Big Boss's perspective, it is a system that works and provides purpose for the soldiers he seeks to protect. However, that doesn't make it right. Instead of adapting to the change in the world by finding a new purpose for his people, Big Boss chose to cling on to the only thing he knows: war. He sought to ensure the survival of his own nation by becoming the warmonger, inciting war, rescuing orphans from the struggle, raising them to fight for Zanzibar Land, and sending them back out. It is a vicious cycle of violence and manipulation, but it is one that gives these soldiers purpose in a world that was moving on without them. Big Boss has never known peace. He's quite literally lived his whole life in war. It makes sense how this character would come to this conclusion, but it is not the right answer. Big Boss nearly brought the world to nuclear devastation in order to not be left behind by the changing times. It is reprehensible, and causes more harm than good. Now don't get me wrong though, Big Boss's descent into a war criminal was not just a product of him simply being afraid of retirement. It's not like he got old and just decided to start doing what he believes are necessary evils. Big Boss's actions throughout the whole series have all been telling signs of his descent. I understand earlier that I said this progression into a war criminal seemed random, but I can explain that too, just hear me out. The harder the establishment fought to bury Big Boss's army nation, the more desperate Big Boss grew to keep his vision alive. Not at the start of the Zanzibar War, but even as far back as the Peace Walker incident. As time progressed, he took more desperate and unethical measures to the point that he eventually came full circle, becoming the manipulator of the soldiers he claimed to care about. I mean, let's think about it. MSF started by taking in the abandoned soldiers from Portable Ops and convincing them to join his cause. They also got willing recruits the more they established their presence and impacted the world. But Big Boss has also straight up kidnapped soldiers he encountered in the field to work at Mother Base. Sure, Miller and Ocelot convinced the soldiers to join their cause, but it's still forcibly taking soldiers away from their country and family to join an army whose entire ideology is about abandoning their country and family. MSF is straight up making the decision for these soldiers. Furthermore, at the start of Ground Zeroes, we see Big Boss literally hiding evidence of nuclear weapons from the United Nations. Something that the United Nations should be aware of, considering nukes can destroy entire cities and create fallout that can devastate anything in the area it passes through on the molecular level. A rebellious mercenary faction operating independently from the nations across the world having access to that kind of power is definitely going to cause some concern. Of course, we don't think of these actions as villainous within the games they take place in. I didn't see them as villainous at first, which is why him becoming a war criminal by Metal Gear 2 seemed so out of place. But that is because we are seeing everything through Big Boss's perspective. We understand his reasoning, motivation, and cause for these actions. According to social cognitive theory, no human being thinks of themselves or their actions as being definitively bad. Humans go through a moral justification process where they convince themselves that their actions serve a moral purpose, even if others may not agree. No one actually identifies as bad or evil, but rather, everyone believes what they're doing is right or necessary to serve a higher moral purpose. And that is how conflict begins. Big Boss believes his army nation is necessary to keep the nations in check, but he needs soldiers to keep the dream alive. Instead of having these soldiers work for countries that are most likely exploiting them, Big Boss rescues them to join his army without a nation, a place he believes will ensure soldiers aren't manipulated and are put to fighting for good causes. The Big Boss also needs to ensure their survival as a nation. He needs to make sure that the UN doesn't interfere with them. Thus, he justifies hiding nuclear weapons as necessary for serving his moral cause. You can see how this concept of morality isn't so black and white. But what is arguably the biggest red flag of his descent is the full-on manipulation of two very significant soldiers in his life. His most loyal soldier, Venom Snake, and his own son, Solid Snake. If Big Boss is acting as commander in Foxhound in the United States, then he is going to need to conduct operations against Outer Heaven to keep suspicion of his involvement hidden. But these missions were never meant to be anything that would actually bring down the establishment. So he sends Solid Snake, a new and inexperienced rookie soldier, to infiltrate Outer Heaven armed with nothing but a radio. It was intended for Solid Snake to gather and report false information on Outer Heaven that would have continued to keep the base safe from the eyes of the world. But let's call this what it is. Big Boss sent his own son on what could be considered a suicide mission. If he succeeded with the intended mission objective, then Outer Heaven would be safe. But if he just so happened to die out on the field, then that works too. But lo and behold, Solid Snake more than exceeded expectations during that operation. With the integrity of Outer Heaven being more and more endangered by Solid Snake's presence, Big Boss commands Venom Snake to take the fall, to die and allow the army nation he's worked so hard to build perish along with him, so that Big Boss can begin anew. Tell me if this sounds familiar to you. Big Boss, needing to maintain the secrecy of his involvement in a secret operation, sends a soldier on a mission whose true purpose is to die. And technically he does it twice. Solid Snake just proved to be too damn good of a soldier to die. By the end of his life, Big Boss has become everything he wanted to fight against. He's kidnapped soldiers from the field to work at Mother Base, hid evidence of owning nuclear weapons from the world, exploited the loyalty of one of his soldiers and altered his identity permanently, sent his son on a suicide mission, led attacks on nuclear disposal sites around the world, created conflicts that left children orphaned across the world, and adopted these children, intending to train them into soldiers, all to repeat a cycle of war with him orchestrating it as the world's only nuclear power. Big Boss has become a soldier manipulating warmonger. All of this stemmed from one life-changing mission, and the meaning Big Boss took from the boss's sacrifice. The meaning that has become his truth. We've seen his perspective and have come to understand how he developed his truth. Hell, even we understood Big Boss's truth after seeing what he has endured. His truth is what motivated his whole life's journey, and the increasingly desperate actions he's taken to hold onto that truth. However, Big Boss wouldn't die holding onto that same truth in Zanzibar in 1999. Thanks to some plot twist bullshittery, we actually get to see Big Boss return to the place where it all started, and we see his experiences have caused him to adopt a new truth. A new truth that is honestly really confusing for me to understand. The year is 2014. Big Boss meets his last living son at the gravesite of the boss. There, we see him embrace Solid Snake, asking him to put his gun down, and his final request, before passing away, to stop fighting. This is already such a drastic difference from the man who claimed he was a gun, but what follows is even more perplexing. Big Boss, speaking to the grave of the boss, says he finally understands the true meaning of her sacrifice. He finally understands her truth.
Boss, you were right. It's not about changing the world. It's about doing our best to leave the world the way it is. It's about respecting the will of others and believing in your own. Isn't that what you fought for? At last, I understand the meaning behind what you did. At last, I understand the truth behind your courage.
This is what has me so confused about the ending. It's hard to understand how Big Boss would have come to this conclusion about the boss's sacrifice. The boss died hoping the world would one day become united. Big Boss and Major Zero would take this wish and come to their own interpretations of how to make it a reality. Despite their methods being different, they both recognized that some sort of action needs to be taken to meet the goal. But Big Boss's new understanding of her truth sounds like inaction. From what we understand about her lecture on the times, the boss understood that shifting times will always bring new allegiances and new enemies, that nothing is absolute, especially an enemy. So, is her truth supposed to be that we shouldn't try to change the world because nothing is absolute? Therefore, does Big Boss plead for Solid Snake to live his life so that he doesn't die like him? As a man who spent his whole life pursuing his vision of a united world, but has only brought himself more chaos, more loss, and has stripped him of any chance of living his own life? Does Big Boss now believe that being a gun is ultimately a pointless endeavor because the times will continue to shift and change the world, despite the efforts of the generations that are left behind? I don't understand this. My people, I am at a loss as to how Big Boss came to this conclusion. Which sucks because it is the final stage of his life. This new understanding is what empowers Big Boss to willingly face his death, with his son by his side. It is a somber scene of a son lighting his stumbling father's cigar and sharing one final moment together in peace. It almost makes you forget the climactic battles these two have fought. I just wish I could understand what it is that brought Big Boss the peace of mind to be able to have this moment. Up until this point, we've covered how Big Boss became disillusioned with the idea of being a patriotic soldier, how he interpreted the boss's sacrifice, how that sacrifice determined the causes he fights for, how the actions he's taken for that cause became more desperate and reprehensible as the times tried to phase him out, how those actions are justified by Big Boss. But I cannot cover how Big Boss came to abandon the truth he formed in Snake Eater and came to understand the boss's truth. I can't cover it because I don't understand what the boss's truth is. So, my people, I'm going to ask you, what do you think is Big Boss's new understanding of the boss's sacrifice? What is it that he means when he says he finally understands the meaning behind what she did? Let me know in the comments below. I can't wait to do a retrospective on this video when I get to it. And as always, my people, thank you for watching.